Good morning, everybody. It is so exciting for us to have another episode of the Cheeky Natives. As usual, we bring you the most amazing guests, speaking about the most relatable topics. It is too early in the morning to be speaking English. I have the supreme pleasure of introducing today's guest, who is Black Girl Magic, Black Excellence personified, and she's our amazing guest today. So I have the pleasure of introducing Carice Anderson, who holds an MBA from Harvard University and has worked with and for top companies such as Deloitte, Google, the Alan Gray Orbis Foundation, and Bain & Company. At McKinsey & Company, Carice managed a leadership development program for Black professionals, and she currently does executive coaching, consulting, and facilitation for top firms. She is also the author of Intelligence Isn't Enough, a Black professional's guide to thriving in the workplace. And I mean, the blurb says this book should be part of every corporate onboarding program. And so welcome, Carice Anderson, to the Cheeky Natives.
Thank you so much, Alma. Thank you guys for having me again. I really appreciate it.
So, Carice, I suppose my first question emanates from the introduction that Alma just gave. She spoke about Black Girl Magic, Black Excellence. And I wanted to know some of your thoughts around these, sort of buzzwords, right? And I suppose to think about, what does actually Black Girl Magic mean and Black Excellence mean? And more importantly, what does it demand from Black professionals?
Wow, you starting off deep. First question, huh? You couldn't ease me in and ask me what are my hobbies? You hitting hard off the jump. Okay, I see how it's gonna be. Okay, so I kind of have two minds when it comes to some of these phrases. I think when I initially heard them, I was like, yes, But then sometimes I think, what is Black excellence? You know what I mean? I think there's just excellence that is executed by Black people. You know what I mean? So I never want people to confuse that term and think that it means that there's some different standard of excellence for Black people, because I just feel like excellence is excellent. And just like mediocrity is mediocrity, and, poor performance is just poor performance. But I understand, living in a world that has, not exactly celebrated us. I see where these phrases have come from. I understand that it is sort of a response to, white supremacy in a lot of ways, but I never want people to think that Black women don't hurt, that we don't have pain. That's the other thing. Sometimes I wonder, we set these standards up for ourselves, and does it allow us to be fully human? It is my only concern. So while I believe we are magical, I think we're amazing. Especially when you think about everything that we've gone through. We are a double minority, Black and a woman. But I just want people to recognize our humanity. We are, flawed. We struggle. We're not always perfect. And I just want people to allow for that as well.
I think that this then segues into a very important conversation, right? So the book is titled Intelligence Isn't Enough, a Black professional's guide to thriving in the workplace. And I think so many of these workplaces demand excellence and magic from their young Black professionals. And so I wanted us to talk a little bit about what it means to thrive in the kind of workplaces that as you read the book, you'll realize we just never created for people who look like us, who come from the places that we come from, who have our backgrounds. What does it look like to thrive and be excellent in those kinds of spaces?
So for me, I think excellence, and this goes back to, I've mentioned this formula in the book, which is that 70-20-10. So that's from the Center for Creative Leadership. 70% of you becoming successful is going to be about your on-the-job opportunities. 20% is about people. So your manager, your mentor, your sponsor, so learning from those individuals. And the 10% is the formal training. So I keep going back to that formula because I honestly believe that's how we're going to be successful. And I think, obviously, I know that there's probably especially if you're living in a racially, charged environment like South Africa or the US or, the UK, there's going to be a higher standard for us. And it's unfortunate. I always feel like it's kind of ridiculous. I'm like, so you're telling me that the people who had less access to everything are the ones you're going to hold to a higher standard? That logic just has never made sense to me, but it is what it is, right? And so I think for us, we do have to give more, where we have to do more, right? To, I think, meet that standard that people have set for us. But I also think, we need to be smart about how we get there. This whole idea of I'm going to come in with my fancy degrees and me and my fancy degrees are just going to get it done is just a lie from the pit of hell. It's not, and that's why I call my book Intelligence is Enough. Our degrees are not enough. We've got to build those relationships and get people to invest in us so they can teach us the things that we need to know so that we can be excellent and we can be successful.
I wanted to talk about something that I'm glad I said, and I'm glad you responded to, because I think in many ways, often these sort of like intelligence isn't enough, we are the ones we need. People at a first glance are like, oh no, I ain't gonna read any of this. This may be some Black person either angry because that's where we are, or some Black person who thinks they're over above us and they think they figured this thing out. But I wanted to talk about this. Your book does not focus on the sort of things we can't change. So it touches on the isms, right? It touches on racism, it touches on unconscious bias, it touches on those particular things. But it really doesn't go in depth, right? And when I came to the book, after I left the book, I was like, I need to have a conversation with this man. And I need to ask her a couple of things, right? And so I want you to speak about that, why you chose not to focus on things like that when you were writing this book.
Thank you for the question. And I did think, I'm a very deliberate person. So if there is something that is missing from this book, it's on purpose. And, because I thought about covering it, I really did. I thought very deeply about covering the isms, right? So all of the isms, but what I thought to myself was, who is my, primary audience for this book? And it is Black professionals. And I do not feel like it is our responsibility to eradicate these systems. I feel like that is the responsibility of the people who were the architects and the executors of these systems. So that's honestly why I don't really address it as much in the book. Now, I think, if you feel like you are in a situation where, someone is demonstrating racist behavior, making racist comments, should you address it? Absolutely. You know what I mean? And I think you can use some of the tips that I give in my communication chapter to be able to do that, to be able to confront some of these, comments and these behaviors. Because honestly, it creates a dynamic between you and this other person that's probably going to get in the way of you having an effective relationship. And it's going to ultimately affect the work product. So you definitely need to address these things for sure. I think you have to obviously pick and choose what you address. But that, back to your original question, that is why I did not address it in my book, because I don't feel like it's our place to fix it.
I particularly love in your response, you said, we did not create these systems, right? Therefore, it's not incumbent on us to try and break these systems, right? And I suppose that's a really big conversation to have to think about. Like, I think what your book really does do powerfully is to say there may be certain things that are in your control, that you are able to control. And let's rather focus on those particular things that will lead to the thriving in the workplace, right? Than focusing on fighting every day the racists, because you know what? That fight you may never win.
And that's the thing. I mean, I think about Black people in South Africa. I think about Black people in America. We've been fighting. We have been toy-toying. We have been protesting. We have marched. We have rioted. And I just, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't continue to do some of those things, but I think that only gets us but so far. And we need the people in power, the people with privilege to come to the party if we're really going to move the needle forward in the way that we want to. And that's on them. Or as the man says, that's on Mary Had a Little Lamb.
I love that, having these conversations. I also think that something that comes up in the book is perfectionism, right? And I think of Brene Brown's quotes about perfectionism being a self-destructive and this addictive belief system that fuels the primary thought that if I look perfect and do everything perfectly, I can avoid or minimize the painful feelings of shame, judgment, and blame. And I think so much of that is also linked to the ways in which we see our self-worth as being intrinsically linked to achievements and how well we perform at work. And this is something that you address in the book as well. And so I wanted us to talk a little bit about why you make the important distinction between self-worth and achievement at work and academically as well.
So, I mean, this comes from a very personal place for me. I mean, I talk about this in my book that, you know, I was the kid in my family who always had the best grades. And I loved school. I mean, I can remember being so excited to learn how to read when I was 5 years old. I don't know if I've been that excited about anything since then. And, you know, my family focus was all about degrees and an IQ and doing well in school and how many letters can you get after your name. And so that became my entire identity on a lot of levels. And, you know, when I started that first job out of undergrad, which I was not very good at, I hope that comes through in the book as well. And I had a bit of an existential crisis because I was like, well, who am I if I'm not the person at the top of the class or near the top? You know, what is my value add to the world? What am I worth without that? And I think, you know, it just made me start realizing that it's dangerous for yourself and for other people for you to walk around with that attitude, because this is what happens. Okay, I get good feedback at work. I get a good rating. I get a good, you know, performance bonus or, you know, feedback off of this project. I'm on a high. I'm loving everybody. You know, everybody's great. I get some bad feedback. I get a bad rating. I don't perform well on some project. I'm a monster. and so I'm constantly fluctuating between, you know, being an angel and being a monster with every piece of feedback that I get. And I just realized like that's not healthy. You know, so I had to say to myself, do I have worth and value just because I take up space on the earth? And then everything else, all this achievement, the degrees, the accolades, all of that is just, you know, it's the cherry on top of the cake, but I'm the cake. And so that's the thing. And not to say that I'm 1,000% there, right? But I'm so much closer to fully separating those two the older that I get. And that's what I think is the goal. I don't think it's perfection. I think it's progress. You know, so whereas if I made a mistake 15 years ago, I might obsess over it for 3 days, and now I obsess over it for an hour. I think I'm headed in the right direction. Will I ever get to that point where I don't obsess over a mistake? Probably not. But maybe I'll at least get it down to 30 minutes. Maybe that's the closest I'll ever get. But I just think it's important for us to just, you know, this whole topic of perfectionism, it's an unrealistic standard, right? So it's like we're, you know, fighting this monster that doesn't even exist. There is no perfect, you know what I mean? And that's what I think it's really important for us to try to understand, where does that come from, and to try to fight it every day and to realize I'm a human. It's part of the T's and C's that I'm going to make mistakes. Like, it's just part of the package. You know what I mean? And so what we do is we make the mistake, we apologize for it, we try to put systems in place so it doesn't happen again, and then we move forward. And that's just that.
I think that it's so beautiful that you've spoken about where this comes from, right? Because there's also a chapter in your book where you speak about imposter syndrome. And I think in many ways, imposter syndrome has also just become a buzzword, right? It gets thrown around a lot, and we're always, imposter syndrome, imposter syndrome. And people who really should have imposter syndrome don't. And the people who shouldn't are the ones, no shade. I mean, you know, mediocre white men have been flourishing forever. And they have just not even like a tinge of the imposter syndrome that would spare so many of us from just having to deal with their mediocrity. But I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome and to really lean into why you felt that it was so important for you to discuss imposter syndrome in this book. In the same chapter in which you talk about negative self-talk and limiting beliefs, and the ways in which I guess that also ties into what it means to navigate these spaces that you don't feel were created for people who look like you.
So, I mean, you know, for those of you that are listening that may not, know the term imposter syndrome, I just think it's always important to level set when we use these terms. I mean, imposter syndrome really has two elements to it. It has that first element, which is you feel like a fraud that's going to be discovered any minute now. And then that second element is you externalize all of your success. So if you're someone that suffers from imposter syndrome, you will use phrases like, oh, I just got lucky. Or anyone could do that. Or, oh, they don't really mean that feedback. They're just being nice. Oh, yeah, I was just in the right place at the right time. We use a lot of like minimizing language, like, oh, okay, I was just thinking, or pretty much, this language that makes it seem like you're not certain about what it is that you're saying. And then I think a last element is it's hard for us to accept compliments. So I just wanted to give people just a little bit of a flavor in terms of imposter syndrome. And the way that it sometimes shows up, and I mean, this ties in with what you just asked too about perfectionism, is there's different kinds of imposter syndromes, right? They're not all the same. There's definitely that perfectionist, so if you make a mistake, you feel shame because you feel like you should have done it without any sort of, mistakes or flaws. There's that person who's, very focused on how much can I juggle? If I can't juggle everything, if I can't juggle 55 things, all the things at work, all the things at home, then I'm a failure. There's also the people who feel like if I can't do things with ease and speed, if I can't get it right the first time, then I'm a failure and people feel shame, right? There's also the people who feel like I should be able to do everything on my own. I don't need to ask for help. If I have to ask for help, I'm a failure. And then there's those people who feel like they should know everything. And if they don't, they feel shame. They feel like a failure. So I think for me, all of those kinds of attitudes, right, can feed into us not showing up in the way that we actually need to be showing up. So for example, the one about, not wanting to ask for help. They call that the soloist. That's that version of imposter syndrome. And so when you're at work and you're brand new to your job or you're brand new to that role, you have to ask for help in order to move efficiently. And if you don't do that, it's going to slow you down. And that could be an issue in your particular role. So I think, some of these mindsets, they really do hold us back. I think even perfectionism, I suffer from this. This is mine. I definitely have the perfectionist element. And I know for me, I can feel myself delaying things, procrastinating, because I'm afraid I'll never live up to that standard that I have for myself. And that can get in the way, right? If you're not delivering on time, if you're barely making the deadline or missing the deadline at work, that's going to be a problem. But it goes back to that perfectionism and how that sometimes leads to procrastination, which, affects our ability to deliver on time. So I think, trying to connect all of these things is super important, and figuring out which one of these might you suffer from. And I'll just add one other thing before I turn it back over to y'all is, for Black people, there's all the reason in the world why we should feel like imposters. I mean, there is very little visual cues in this world that are telling us that we can be successful. We deserve to be in these spaces. You know what I mean? So there's no wonder that we might suffer from imposter syndrome. And I felt like it was important to talk about it, because I felt like I saw a lot of really talented Black people who were questioning, do I deserve to be here? Do I deserve to have this job? What I just didn't see that level of question with some of my white counterparts. And I didn't see them. And if they did, they were questioning just maybe for themselves. I think sometimes for us, it's because of everything we've seen and experienced that's leading us to question if we deserve to have these opportunities and to be in these organizations.
But Carice is dragging me for filth. Let me tell y'all.
Collect your drag.
I'm just sitting here
What you need to do is
what is going on? Like, why am I being dragged through the mud? Okay.
I feel like Carice was dragging me because yesterday I was supposed to submit something. I could have submitted something yesterday, but I was like, oh, I just want to read over it again, let it just marinate, and I'll do it on Monday, And I am feeling so dragged. I'm just like, let me have some tea, because wow, sis, wow, you didn't have to come for us.
No, and I think it's important questions to have. I'm glad Carice said this, because it makes me feel like there's some progress in my life. I feel like before, even if I got some feedback, let's not even call it bad feedback, let's just call it feedback, I will be like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Why? you see you screwed up, and I would beat myself up, right? Even though the content of the feedback is not bad, it's like, this is a decent draft. This is something that I can work on. And in my head, I'm like, no, like, say it's good or something. But there are even instances where there is good feedback, you know, where someone's like, this is an excellent draft. Thank you for this. Even then I'm like, I just got lucky. You know, maybe they ran out of time, and they're just like, I'll use whatever, you know. So there is like this, for me at least, it's like reckoning quite deeply with this inherent self-unworthiness that exists. And I think like a lot of the times it's a result of the places that I've been in, and how I haven't actually realized that those places affected me deeply, in a way that like oftentimes I'm transported to a place where like a white woman in a law firm told me once that I don't know how to write a letter. And so every time I do something, I'm thinking about like, I'm waiting for the moment where someone else will tell me that. So there seems to, and I want to speak a little bit about like, what are the allowances that we give ourselves to room for learning, right? You spoke about this in the book about your first job. You sort of wanted to just enter into that job and know what to do. So even when people were telling you, Carice, this is how the culture works, in your mind you were like, oh my gosh, I'm not good enough. But it wasn't even about that. It was just like, you're not exposed to this type of work environment or this type of working. And so even when the feedback is not necessarily personal to you, you've internalized it because of past trauma. How do you give yourself the allowances to be like, you know what, this is a new environment. I need to give myself time to acclimate to the way that they work. And then I can put a standard on myself. Because I think imposter robs us of even knowing new environments and how we show up in those environments.
Well, some of it even goes back to, I think, this imposter syndrome, because part of what I think is at the root of imposter syndrome is we have this, I saw somebody refer to it, I don't know, I can't remember the person's name, but they refer to it as the competent rule book. So you have this idea of, how do competent people show up? Well, competent people know everything, they do everything right on the first try, they don't ask for help. And so when we don't live up to that standard, we beat ourselves up. I think you couple that with some of these messages that we get about, oh, well, once you get your degree, oh, the world is going to open up for you, you know, and you're just going to fly. And that's the kind of messages we need to dispel, because it's not the truth. It's not true at all. Just because you have that degree, that means you've got like the technical skills to be able to be successful, but it doesn't mean you understand how that environment works. And that is why you need people in that environment. And it doesn't matter, you know, like I mentioned this before on other conversations I've had, but you know, if you look at McKinsey and Bain, those are both management consulting firms, but their cultures are very different. So you can't walk into a McKinsey and say, well, this is how they did it at Bain, so we're going to do it that way here, you know, or vice versa. You have to learn how that environment works. And I think there's also something about, sometimes our language doesn't help. Like we'll say things like, well, I'm a failure. It's like, no, I failed. I did something that didn't work. I am not a failure. You know what I mean? So even when you get this feedback, you know, you might say to yourself, you know, oh, I'm an idiot. It's like, no, I'm a young person who's early in my career who's still learning. You know what I mean? So I think even some of the things that we say to ourselves, the standards that we hold ourselves to, really contribute to some of this shame and this feeling of being a failure. So we got to watch that too, and just realize that, you know, it's not about perfection, it's progress.
I wanted to talk about something that I think is quite powerful in the book, because I think this is like one of the second moments that I've encountered it, but really understood it in your book, is this idea of working on your career and working in your career. I think we as people often just work in our careers, like we show up at work, you do what you need to do, and you move. And it seems your book tries to offer us like a distinction, right? To be like, these two things achieve different things. And obviously one of them you continue to work on in your book, and we'll discuss this a little bit later. But I just wanted to speak about like the distinction between working in your career and working on your career.
So for example, if I had a cookie shop, let's say. So working in my business, and this is a term that comes from the entrepreneurial world, working in your business. So if I had a cookie shop, that would be me buying my ingredients, mixing my cookies, baking my cookies, delivering my cookies to my customers. That's working in my business. Working on my business is taking a step back and saying, should I even be making cookies? Should I be selling, I don't know, cupcakes? Am I selling to the right customer in the right places at the right time, at the right price point? So it's really taking that bigger step back. And what I realize is that same thought could be applied to our careers. I feel like a lot of us, and a lot of this goes back to these messages, which is the whole reason why I wrote this book, is we get these messages about be excellent, put your head down, work hard, and somebody will come and, tap you on the shoulder and knight you as the chosen one. And so that contributes, I think, to us only focusing on the working in our career and not the working on our career, which is, let me take a step back. Am I developing the right skills at the right time? Am I building the right relationships? Do I have the right mentors and sponsors? Am I growing at the right pace? All of these kind of larger questions, I feel like they're the more strategic questions for our career. And so we need to start carving out some time. We need to move away from that to-do list, because I worship at the altar of the almighty to-do list as well. But sometimes we need to take a step back from that and ask those bigger questions to make sure things are moving in the right direction in our careers.
So I also want to talk a little bit about personal branding, right? Because this is something that you cover quite extensively in the book. But I think that when a lot of us think about personal branding, it feels almost like, it feels strange, the idea that you brand yourself. It's like, why would I want to do that? But this is something you cover quite extensively as something that is very important in order for people to thrive and flourish. So I'm wondering if you could speak just a little bit to that, and why you thought it's so important to talk about personal branding to young Black professionals.
From what I've seen, from my experience, I think in corporates, people get sifted quite quickly. You're thinking to yourself, well, I'm brand new and, I've got all the time in the world, but the people who are senior, the people who are the decision makers are deciding very quickly who is worth my time and who isn't, who has potential and who doesn't, who are going to be the future leaders of this organization and who isn't. And so that's why I wanted to share this concept with young people, because I feel like because those decisions are being made by people in leadership, they need to be aware that those are being made so that they can decide, how do I want to show up? How do I want to present myself? How do I want to position myself so that, if I do want to stay at this company, if I do want to be seen as someone who has potential and someone who's worth the investment, what people are looking for, so that, we're not eliminated so quickly from the people that the leaders want to invest in. So that's kind of the main reason. And I talk about this concept very briefly in the book called the speed of judgment. So you got to figure out in your company, what is that speed of judgment? How quickly are people judging you and deciding if you're worth their time or not? Because the quicker that, that speed of judgment is, the more you need to be thoughtful about how you show up in that space. And I just wanted people to understand, you do have a brand, even if you don't want one, even if you don't care about it. People, think about it. When you all probably met me, you had a perception of me, and it took probably like 10 seconds to be like, okay, what's this chick about, and we do it all the time as people. So of course it's happening at work too, where it's high stakes, there's money involved, people don't have a lot of time. There's a lot of constraints. So people are judging you. And so you need to be aware of kind of what are the elements that they're judging you on, so that you can think about, how do I want to show up? What do I want people to say about me when I'm not in the room? What are the words and emotions that I want to invoke when somebody says Carice? And I just think a lot of us, we think it's all about, it's just about my work product and that's it. Once again, because we just don't have the exposure. So I think it's about trying to help folks understand, people are judging you on how you dress, how you speak, the quality of your work product. Sometimes they look at your social media, so you can make a decision about how you want to show up, but just know that judgment is happening.
What happens when your career doesn't go in the way that you have expected? I think that a lot of young people plan their careers and have very deep ideas of what their careers will be like. And as you've shown in the book, life happens. And as COVID has shown us, life happens as well. So what happens when life happens?
So I think a couple things, right? I mean, I talk in the book about that victim versus victor mindset, you know? So when something happens, you know, you need to be asking yourself, not why did this happen to me, but why did this happen for me? What is the lesson that I'm supposed to get out of this particular situation? So let's say, for example, you know, you've gotten a law degree, you went into a law firm and you didn't do well. You know, I think you need to be asking yourself, you know, what's happening here? Like, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Maybe this is a sign from the universe that, you know, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. That could be one question I think you could ask. I think you can also ask yourself, you know, what role have I played in not doing well? What is my part, you know, in this equation, you know, and asking for that feedback, asking people to tell you, you know, what is it that you think I'm good at? What do you think I need to develop on? And getting some tips from people on how to move the needle forward on both of those elements, right? How do you leverage your strengths more? How do you address those areas for development? And that would probably be what I would consider, right? Is really those two things: getting the feedback and just trying to understand what is the message, what is the lesson I'm supposed to be learning out of this.
So what's really interesting for me is just to circle back on a conversation about personal branding. Um, I'm really thinking about the link between what you talk so beautifully about in the book about um, cultural intelligence, right? So the idea of entering someone's house and, you know, doing what they're doing. So you don't go to Carice's house and put your feet on the table if that isn't something that Carice wants you to do. So you essentially ask someone. But I'm thinking about the link between cultural intelligence, the idea of personal branding, and some form of assimilation and how those things work together. I wonder often about how personal branding is assimilation in some instances. So let's say my personal brand is this radical Black queer feminist, right? And I enter into this really patriarchal, anti-woman, anti-queer, anti-Black space. It means that my personal branding does not necessarily align with the culture of the firm. And someone who would be culturally intelligent would be like, okay, I can't show up as my full self in this place. So I would need to tweak certain aspects of myself in order to be accepted in a place like this. So what happens to us losing the essence of ourselves by being culturally intelligent and assimilating into a culture that erodes who we are inherently?
Well, look, first off, I think if you are a radical queer feminist and you're going into a patriarchal, maybe you shouldn't have even gone there. Let's start there, right? I think there is some element of evaluating before you even take that job. Is this a good fit for me? Because every organization is not a good fit for you. And when I say you, I don't even mean you specifically. I mean you in general. I think we all are so different. And, you know, we're going to find it easier to be in certain spaces than others. So that's number one. Maybe that's a place you should have never gone to or accepted a role at. But let's say you do accept that role and you get in there. And I think here's the thing, you know, about personal branding and kind of cultural intelligence. And that's why I say, you know, you got to know yourself, know other people, know your environment, bring all of that together to cultivate a personal brand and a communication style that allows for maximum impact. But your personal brand, I think in order for it to work for you, it has to be authentic. If you assimilate too much and you water yourself down too much, that's not gonna get you the results that you want, because people are gonna experience you as inauthentic.
I have a question here, because I think about my time in law firms, right? And it's really interesting because now I'm questioning whether the people that I met there were authentically themselves and therefore could meet the culture, or assimilated too much and therefore that became who they are. But I'm wondering about, like, you know, I often speak about this and I want to know your thoughts about, I say marginality does not give you a badge of politics. The fact that you're a Black woman, the fact that you're Black, the fact that you're queer doesn't in of itself mean that you are feminist or you are anti-Black or it doesn't in itself do that, right? But I want to know about those. I mean, you may, in your experience, have seen some of these people where, like, you're shook, this person is like Black, and you thinking, oh no, like, homegirl is going to be with me, and they like completely change course, right? And then you're like, hold up, what is going on? And so what do you do in those instances, right, where, like, because I think the at least in the South African context, a lot of corporate identities or corporate transformation is literally a number of Black people. So when we have about 30% of Black people, we are transformed. But what is the makeup of those Black people? If they assimilate to the culture of it, does that mean that they're assimilating for success, or it's just who they are? And what does that mean for transformation?
So I think there's a couple different ways to look at this. Like I've seen this phenomenon in the US too, where you have Black people who have grown up in very affluent environments, and they've grown up mostly around white people. So that's what they're comfortable around, and I've seen Black men who exclusively only date white women, because that's what they've grown up with, that's what they've grown up around, and that's what they're comfortable with. So if you take someone like that and put them into, a majority white environment, it doesn't even feel like assimilation probably to them on some levels, because that's what they're used to. And I know, like, Black people, we're not monolithic, right? We all have different experiences. And that's why I even say in the book, I don't say all Black people struggle. It's some Black people, because there are some that don't. And I've met some of those people even here in South Africa, where they're like, well, I don't have these issues, and I get along with white people, and, like, it's fine for them. I think if you have, everybody has to decide what their boundaries are, though. And that's different for different folks. And we also have to respect each other, for those boundaries. Because look, the things that I say that I'm unwilling to do to assimilate, Alma might be fine with that. She might be like, I'm willing to do those things, and I don't feel like I'm compromising myself. So I think it all depends on, an individual. But I think for a corporate, they have to look at themselves and say, what does transformation actually mean? Does it mean serving like pop and hodu in the canteen? You know what I mean? Or is it really about creating an inclusive environment where people feel like they can show up and be some version of themselves? They don't feel like they've got to put on this full mask every time they walk through the door. That, for me, is real transformation. And I think really trying to understand where people are coming from and why sometimes folks don't necessarily show up exactly as they want them to, and creating a space where people do feel comfortable, to challenge authority, or, challenge people who are older or more senior than them. That takes time. You've got to create that environment for people to feel that level of comfort. So that, for me, is real transformation. And, everybody's not going to want to participate too. You're going to have some Black people who are like, I don't want to be a part of that. I'm not a radical. I just came here to do my job. And that's okay too. We have to allow for all kinds of folks. But, for those of us that want that, I think we should make that known for sure.
I want to talk a little bit about communication and hard questions. And I think that as a function of how so many of us have grown up, having hard conversations doesn't come naturally to us. It also comes across, I think it's also very cultural, right? The way in which we think about talking about problems or disagreements. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about those hard conversations and why you feel like communication is such an important aspect for people to thrive.
So if you think about communication, it is the basis for pretty much everything. It's the basis for how we get our work done, for respect, for resolving, dynamics, tension in our relationships. So it's really critical. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about a second ago in terms of that speed of judgment in your organization. So if you don't communicate, if you don't let people know what your perspective is or what your take is on things, people are forming those judgments. And what happens is, if there's some sort of gap between you and me, I'm going to normally fill that gap with negative perceptions and negative, thoughts about you. And so that's why I think it's important for us to communicate so we can close that gap. And we don't allow people to just form their own perceptions of us. And I know it's a challenge. Like I didn't grow up, understanding how to have conflict in a very professional or calm way. I grew up in a family where our conflict was much more lively, shall we say. And so when I showed up in my job, I was like, okay, either I'm gonna like flip out and turn over tables and chairs, or I'm just not gonna say anything. And I saw, even when I was working at McKinsey, I saw when people didn't discuss those things, when they didn't share their perspective, people form their own perceptions about individuals. And that's why we have to learn how to speak up. We can't just allow people to think whatever it is they want to think about us and say whatever it is they want to say, especially when we're dealing with someone more senior than us. Because think about it, they have more credibility than us. So when they're out here saying all these things about us, people are believing it. And that's shaping our brand. That's shaping how people see us. And that's why we have to find a way to get our voice, to get our perspective, into that conversation, so that people aren't just allowed to kind of, form these negative perceptions without hearing from us. And I'm not saying that it's easy. I promise you, I'm not saying that, but it gets easier. I don't enjoy conflict. I don't enjoy addressing these tensions, but I recognize the fallout if I don't. And so I put on my big girl panties and I address it. And I'm better now. Back in the day, my palms would get sweaty, my heart would be racing. Now I don't really experience any of that, but I know that it has to be done. And so I find the courage to be able to do it. And that's why I give people, scenarios and things to be able to say. I wanted to get as specific as I could to help you all have those conversations, because I know that they're not easy. And I wish somebody had told me that, that stuff when I was much younger than I am now. But I'm trying to give it to you all in this book.
I remember a chapter, I think it's chapter 9 of Shonda Rhimes' book, where she speaks about difficult conversations. And she says, at the end of difficult conversations is peace. And I tend to hold on to that a lot. Just saying that, like, if I keep quiet, I'm going to live with the uncomfortability of my silence. And that's going to eat me up more. And then things are going to spiral out of control. And now I'm going to be reacting from this place of the knowledge that I know that I didn't speak of, right? So I thought that the offering in your book about conversations that are difficult was really important, because we work often in such hostile environments where if you don't talk, like like things are going to spiral. And then what happens when it's like completely like just down a rabbit hole? What I wanted to speak about as well is you speak about the relationship between the encounter between EQ and your relationships. And I wanted to read a bit about this because this is really, really powerful for me. You write, in many Black families, the focus is on merely surviving and moving on with life. We do not create the space to spend time on or to investigate emotions and trauma. Historically, and even in today in Black culture, we have not been comfortable talking about mental health. Many of us have not had widespread access to or even trust in mental health professionals to help us understand, process, and give voice and language to our emotions. If we are ever to fully master ourselves, I believe, we have to be able to know what is going on within us. We have to be able to own and interrogate what we're feeling so that we can intentionally choose how we want to respond to those emotions. When we don't, we run the risk of unleashing those negative emotions onto other people. If we want to understand others, we need to understand ourselves first. And I thought that was just such a powerful thing often we don't talk about mental health when we think about thriving in the workplace and we think about Black excellence and we think about that. But in most instances, even the very notion of showing up a particular way at work is what is causing most of our anxieties and mental well-being. So I wanted to speak a little bit about that, right? About the idea of like thinking about therapy, life coaching, career coaching as a sort of lifestyle. So not necessarily you're correcting a wrong, but thinking of it as you're making sure that you're well for yourself so you can show up as your best self.
Absolutely. I mean, even when you talk about emotional intelligence, the first element of emotional intelligence is being able to understand, recognize, and manage my own emotions. Because if I can't do that, then how can I understand and influence the emotions of other people? I can't, because I haven't even done that work for myself. So I think, there's collective trauma for Black people, especially in the kinds of places you and I and Alma have grown up in. And then there's just that individual trauma too, that we need to work through so that, when we go to work, we don't show up with all of that. You know what I mean? And I give an example in the book when I talk about a girl that I was coaching at McKinsey who couldn't ask for help. And all of that went back to the fact that she grew up in a single parent home and her mother just was working hard to put food on the table and pay their school fees. And she wasn't around to help them as much as, her mother probably wanted to. And so when she started working, she couldn't ask for help. And that asking for help was a huge component to being successful in that environment, because she was new and she needed to be able to do things at a certain pace, and she couldn't do them because she just didn't know how. And that's why the help was, you know what I mean? So that's why I tell that story, to help people connect. That trauma from the past is impacting how we show up today. And I think getting some sort of a coach, a therapist, psychologist, whatever you want to call it, to help you identify some of that, and then to work through it, to sort of reframe that experience. I mean, I talk in the book about how she could reframe it. Like, my mom couldn't help me then, but that doesn't mean I can't ask for help now. People want me to ask for help. They're expecting me to ask for that help. You know what I mean? And eventually, I think if we can reframe our kind of root belief about certain things, then we ultimately can change our behavior. And that's what I want people to understand. It's, and I know in America too, Black people, in general, do not subscribe to mental health, where it's getting better, right? I'm seeing more and more of it, but we still have a long ways to go. And I think it's the same thing here. We need somebody to help us unpack everything that's happening with us so that we can show up in the best way, in every area of our life, including our work life.
Speaking about help, I wanted to talk a little bit about just the idea of a mentor and a sponsor, because I think in many ways that is an example of reaching out and getting help, right? And for a lot of us, that may feel uncomfortable, the idea that you need to ask people, because you feel like you've gotten fine on your own, right? So why do you now need to get this person to help you? So I want to talk a little bit about mentorship and sponsorship and why you wanted to speak so deeply about that.
Well, I mean, I think, I hear a lot of people talk about mentorship. I feel like mentorship is everywhere. What I don't hear us talk as much about is sponsorship. And for those of you that are listening that maybe have never heard those terms before, mentorship is just all about who's going to share some good advice with you, share some wisdom, maybe from their own experiences. Sponsorship and mentorship can come from anywhere. It can come from somebody who's more junior than you, somebody from a different company, a different industry, and you can have all kinds of mentors. Maybe you have a mentor that helps you with your work-life balance and another mentor who helps you on technical skills, right? Sponsorship has to be somebody who's senior in your organization, somebody who's got what I like to call juice, somebody who's influential. When that person speaks, people listen. And this is somebody who's going to open up doors for you, create opportunities for you that you couldn't create for yourself. That sponsor is in rooms where decisions are being made about bonuses and raises and promotions and ratings. That sponsor's in rooms that you are not in. And so you need those individuals to want to speak on your behalf and advocate for you to help you advance your career. And what I found with a lot of underrepresented folks is we are over-mentored and under-sponsored. And we wonder why we can't advance our careers as much as we would like to. Because we're like, I'm technically strong. Like, I'm bright. I've got all the degrees, you know what I mean? But what you don't have is that sponsor who also gives you cover when you take a risk and when you kind of step out there. That person says, hey, I've got Alma. I'm going to cover her if she takes this risk. And if she falls down, you guys come to me. Don't hold her responsible. You come to me. You know what I mean? And I'm going to make sure that she's successful. I'm going to make sure she doesn't fall down on this thing. I'm going to make sure she has the right support and feedback. And so that's why I thought it was important to talk about it in my book, because I wanted to expose people to that concept of sponsorship and get them thinking about, do I have a sponsor in this organization I'm in? And if I don't, and you should have multiple sponsors, not just one, just in case that person leaves. So if I don't have a sponsor, what is it that I need to do to get one? And how do I maintain that relationship so that, you know, it really serves the purpose of helping me advance in my career?
I wanted to speak a bit. The book has been out for a little bit of a while, and so there's been some people who've engaged with the book. What have been some of the responses that have been pleasant and some of the responses that have surprised you about the book? And then I suppose a related question to that is, what is your hope for what the book can do in the world?
So in terms of the responses, I mean, I honestly have not, and I know this may not sound believable, but I promise you, I haven't gotten any negative feedback on it. To be honest, most people, all the people who've written me either on LinkedIn or Instagram or even Facebook, you know, are saying, I wish I'd had this book, you know, 10 years ago. I'm going to give copies of this book to my mentees. I would say that that has been the overwhelming response. And that really warms my heart, because that's the whole reason why I wrote it. That, you know, to answer your second question, that is my hope for the book. I just hate seeing people make the same mistakes I made in 1998. I'm like, there's no reason for that. You know what I mean? Too many of us have gone through those mistakes already. Why should y'all have to make the same mistakes I made then? You know what I mean? So that's really what my hope for the book was, just to save people some unnecessary pain, and frustration and disappointment. That was really my hope for the book. And to help, you know, ultimately, I want to see more Black people running companies in South Africa. But we can't do that if we can't get past the early parts of our career and be successful. So that is my ultimate hope, you know, in 10, 15 years, to see, you know, most of the Fortune, whatever, well, I guess the JSE listed companies here in South Africa being run by Black people, you know, because of the percentage of the population that Black people represent. I think it only makes sense. But I think we need, like I said, we got to start our careers off on the right foot to be able to ascend to those levels. I will say the one piece of, maybe this wasn't even like negative feedback, at least not to me. You guys might think differently, but, you know, somebody was like, oh, I feel like the examples in the book might have been limited to certain companies, but, you know, some of the companies that I reference in the book, I don't name. So all of the examples that I give are not just from, you know, McKinsey or Deloitte or wherever I've worked, but also, you know, I worked as a consultant. And so I've been exposed to a lot of different companies through my consultant work. And I did make that point to the person. I don't name every company in the book. And also, like, you know, I did work for Google in 2019. I don't mention Google in the book, but the framework for my book, the first framework for my book, I actually shared at that Google, it was like a 4-day Google training that I did. So, and I got such great feedback from that framework. That's what made me start thinking like, okay, maybe I need to put this in a book. And so there are some companies that I've had exposure to that I don't even mention in the book, but that was one piece of I guess you could maybe say negative feedback that I got, but all the rest of it has been really, really positive.
No, I think that's really good. I mean, I don't think it's negative feedback. Also, like, why would we want to name everything? Perhaps maybe McKinsey has a certain, and I think some of the examples that you do make is like these high functioning environments, right? And what is expected for you in these high functioning environments. Another question that I thought about is, how does the book assist people like myself who are no longer in like a professional space in that we work for someone, but are embarking on working for ourselves? But this working for ourselves necessarily means working with senior people in my profession particularly, or working with other, like if you're a consultant, you would be consulting with a firm or a particular business. How does the book help us navigating that space, because there are different demands there than in a corporate space?
Yeah. I mean, I think my book, for the most part, is probably meant for people who are working in a corporate, but I also think, you know, there are certain parts of it that you can apply, right? My chapter on getting your mind right, that, you know, for me, applies to anyone, you know, because we all need to be constantly working on our mindset. I think also, you know, my chapter on working with other people, because even as an entrepreneur, you're still going to have to work with other people. It's in a different context. Maybe it's people that are suppliers. Maybe it's people that are partners, if you're doing any sort of, venture with other folks. So I think that chapter is also very helpful to you if you are an entrepreneur. And I think on some levels that communication chapter too, because, you have to be able to communicate well, no matter who you're working for or working with. And I would also say that if you are an entrepreneur, I think, give this book to your employees. I think, that could definitely help change the culture, and, which ultimately is going to lead to higher engagement and ultimately better business results. So I think, there are some nuggets in here for people who are entrepreneurs as well.
So what's next for you, Carice? Because you've written this amazing book. What's next?
What can we
That's
expect next?
That's a very good question. I think I have a lot of ideas about what I want to do. I just keep thinking about how can I make this book come to life for people? Because I actually ran a giveaway for a book club, and we just wrapped up like 2 weeks ago, but I made all of the members of the book club on the last session. I said, come with your action plan about what you're going to do based off what you've read. And then in 3 months, I'm checking in with y'all to see what progress you've made. Because it's not enough for me for people to buy my book, even though I appreciate it. It's not enough for you to read my book. I appreciate that too. I want you to put the book to action. So I'm trying to think about ways to be able to help people do that, to almost serve as like an accountability partner for you, check in with you to see like, okay, what did you say you were going to do 3 months ago, and what have you actually done? What support do you need? What questions do you have? How can I help you? So I don't know exactly what format that will take, but that's my ultimate goal, is to help people actually action the ideas and the insights that they've gotten from the book. If y'all have any ideas, please let me know.
It's really interesting because I've been thinking a lot about asking you this question, right? I know that you're a career coach. Do you coach executives? Do you coach middle people? Do you coach entrance people? Because I think that, I'm realizing that I need a career coach. And in a sense that there's the mindset thing that I'm really struggling with. Like I can identify a lot with what you've said about, like, when someone gives you negative feedback, you dwell in it for days, because I'm that type of person. Like, even if I make a mistake, that is not detrimental, I'll think about that for a week. Maybe now it's like a day and not a week anymore. So I'm getting better, but I really want to limit it to like 30 minutes. So, or like 15 minutes or whatever it is, because I think that oftentimes it really hampers my productivity. And I need to be honest to myself and be like, I no longer want to be this person. I need to do better for myself. So I'm wondering about like the type of, if you do individual coaching and what that looks like.
So to answer your question, I mean, I coach across pretty much every level. Like, I'm coaching, a newly minted CEO for a reinsurance company in West Africa, all the way to people who are pretty early in their careers. So I kind of run the gamut in terms of levels. The individual coaching I do, but I do it through my employer, Korn Ferry. So we'd have to talk offline about that. But I think it's a fantastic idea. And there are also people I'm happy to recommend you to as well. But I think it's a fantastic idea to just invest in yourself, to have that, hour, a month, or a week, whatever it is, to just sit and just be still and to think about yourself, and to have somebody else just totally think about you and ask you some deep questions, give you the space to be able to think deeply about yourself. Because at the end of the day, I think you have all the answers for yourself. It's just about creating that space and having somebody ask you those questions to help you kind of unearth those answers. But I think it's a fantastic investment in yourself and in your business as well. So I highly recommend it.
I mean, Carice, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think that cheeky natives everywhere are going to enjoy the nuggets and the little pearls of wisdoms that come out of this conversation. Thank you so much for being in conversation with us again, just to speak differently about the book. And thank you also for writing Intelligence Isn't Enough. I think that a lot of Black people, particularly Black women, need to start, talking about like the experiences, because often we say, oh no, we don't have enough CEOs, or we don't have enough of this. But the honest truth is the environments that are ready for Black CEOs, right? Or Black women CEOs. So to also think about that. And I think your book allows us to think really deeply about like what we want from ourselves and what we want from our careers. And if we really want to be successful, then we need to start doing the work on ourselves in the space that we work in. And so thank you very, very much for that. As you know, we're giving you your flowers. We're saying that, like, thank you for listening to the spirits wherever they may be, and being like, this isn't only something that belongs in a PowerPoint presentation or some form of workshopping, but actually a resource that people can return to. So from the Cheeky Natives, we are really, really grateful. And Cheeky Merchants and Cheeky Natives everywhere. The Cheeky Merchant is a bookstore that loves you. So what we've done is we've gotten copies of Intelligent Isn't Enough, and Carice has been so kind to sign them for us. So if you purchase from the Cheeky Merchant, you will get a signed copy. So yes, until next time, Cheeky Natives, we hope to please, like, comment, share this conversation. Just give us feedback and your thoughts about what you thought of the conversation. Again, Carice, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.